Hello everyone and welcome to the channel. Now in this particular video I'm going to take questions from physical chemistry part, especially from the section B, that is 2 marker questions, and I'm going to take from the paper of CSIRNet, which was asked in Assam and Meghalaya region, right? So this question paper is taken from Assam and Meghalaya region, and I would like to thank Prem Prakash and Brijesh for sending me the question paper, and like this is all because of you guys, right? So I'm going to take all the questions from part B for physical chemistry. I'll try to solve them up. So let's quickly dig into that. Alright, so the first question over here, it says that in a cubic crystal, what will be the interplanar distance of 111 plane showing the first order reflection at 2 theta of 60 degree when the X rays are used and they have lambda value, that is the wavelength of X rays is 1.54 angstrom. Okay, now this is very easy question. Okay, what you have to use is Bragg's equation, that is 2d sine theta is equals to n lambda. What they are asking is d, that is interplanar distance. Okay, so they are asking about d, and what you have is 2 theta, and 2 theta is given 60 degrees. So that's the glancing angle which is given to you. Theta will be how much? It will be 30 degree, right? So that's how you can easily calculate theta over here. Now lambda is given to you, it's first order, so n value is given to you 1, lambda is given to you 1.54 angstrom. So just put these values in this particular formula, so it will be 2 d sine 30, and that is going to be 1 into 1.54, or you can say that 2 into d into sine 30 is 1 by 2, and that's 1.54 itself. So this and this will be cancelled out, so your interplanar distance will come out to be 1.54 angstrom. You don't have to do anything with these Miller indices. So the answer will be option number 2, like that. Okay, so it's so simple. It was just a very simple question asked for 2 marks, right? Let's go for the next question then. It says that a repeated measurement of the melting point of solid gave values 195, 205 and 210 degrees Celsius. The actual melting point of the solid is 200 degrees Celsius. The percentage relative error in the average experimental result is, okay. So they are asking about the average experimental result, the relative error in that. First of all, try to find out the average experimental value, okay. So the average, okay, the average experimental value, okay. So that will be given by, just add all of them, so 195 plus 205 plus 210 and divided by 3, right? So the average value will come out around 610 divided by 3. Okay, so that's the value, that's the average value which you are going to get. Now it's given that the actual value is 210. Okay, so actual value is 200 degrees Celsius. That's what your actual value is. Now you have to calculate the relative error. Okay, so percentage relative error you have to calculate. It's given by the formula. So the formula says that experimental value, okay, experimental value minus actual value divided by actual value, okay, and into 100. So that's going to give you the percentage relative error. So let's try to solve it. Experimental value is 610 by 3, actual value is 200 divided by 200 and into 100. Okay, so if you just solve, these two zeros can be cancelled out with these two zeros, and if you solve this up in the numerator, you will get 610 minus, like I'll do it over here. So 610 here minus 600, I have taken LCM as 3, and into 1 by 2, this 2 will become 1 by 2. Okay, or you can say that this is going to be how much? This is going to be 10 upon 6 or 1.66. So that is going to be the relative error, or you can round off this value and the answer will be your option number 2, that is 1.7 as the relative error, right? So this was from your from the error part, from the data analysis part. So that's how this has to be done. All right, let's go to the next question then. The next question says, which of the following aqueous solution will have the lowest mean ionic activity coefficient? Okay, so for that, I hope you guys know this thing, that let's say if I have a salt of Mx and Ay, where M is the positive part and A is the negative part of the salt, and X is the, like X and Y are the stoichiometric numbers of them, and let's say it will split up, and it will give you x number of m plus, okay, and it is going to give you y number of, or y moles of your A minus. Okay, so that's how you are going to get this particular salt. So in this particular way, your activity will be given by actually activity of the cation to the power x and activity of anion to the power y. That's how you can write down, right? Or in overall, you can write down that overall activity, mean ionic activity, A plus minus to the power x plus y. Now mean ionic activity can be given by this, that is A is equals to gamma m. Gamma is mean ionic activity coefficient. Okay, so sorry, this is ionic activity coefficient. So you can replace this thing over here, and if you do that, first of all, let's write down for both of them. So for cation, the activity will be activity coefficient of cation into m. M is the molality of that, or the concentration of that, and A minus will be given by gamma minus into m. Okay, so that means what, your A is going to be actually this A. If you substitute the values over here, you are going to get gamma plus, okay, there should be x also and there should be y also here. Okay, so you have to multiply these terms also. Yeah, so it will be gamma plus x m to the power x, okay, and this will be gamma minus and y m to the power y. All right, now what you have to do is you can just write down the overall values. So the overall value will be A is equals to gamma plus minus, this is the overall activity, and this is mean ionic activity coefficient, now gamma plus minus. Okay, so the power will be how much, it will be x plus y. Then you will be having x to the power x, y to the power y, and you will be having m to the power x plus y. So the concentration to the power m plus y is x plus y. So if you for in the question you have to calculate your mean ionic activity coefficient, right? So that you can write down in this way, that is gamma plus minus to the power x plus y will be actually equal to A upon x to the power x, y to the power y, and m to the power x plus y. Now what you can find out from this relation? You can find it out that the mean ionic activity coefficient is actually inversely proportional to the charges, okay, the number of charges. So the higher the charge, smaller will be mean ionic activity coefficient, and it is also inversely proportional to the concentration. So higher the concentration is smaller the mean ionic activity coefficient. So let me just write down here. So it's inversely proportional to the charge and it's inversely proportional to the concentration. Okay, so based upon that, you can see that for all of them, if I write down for NaCl, Na plus and Cl minus, so the charges are 1 and 1, whereas for MgCl2 it will be Mg plus 2 and Cl minus, so the charges are 2 and 1, so the charge is more over here, right? So obviously MgCl2 will have more charge, so smaller amount of mean ionic activity coefficient. So these will have higher value, these among these anyone will have lower value. Okay, so you can just eliminate these two options. Talking about the concentration now, the concentration is highest over here, so more the concentration is smaller the value. Remember, you have to tell the lowest mean ionic activity coefficient in the question. So the concentration is also higher over here, as well as the charge is also high over here in the option number 4. So option number 4 is the one which have lowest mean ionic activity coefficient. You just have to do like that. Okay, you don't have to solve and you don't have to go into the solution. You can do that like that also. That is also one of the way you can calculate the mean ionic activity coefficient of each of the option, and you can go like that. But this way is more prominent, it's more like relatable. You can just solve it in this way and it will be better to understand this, right? All right, so let's go to the next question then. All right, so the next question is in the terms of ratio of adsorption and desorption of the rate constant of the gas on the metal surface is 0.2. So ratio of adsorption and desorption, that is Ka upon Kd, is given 0.2 kilopascal. Okay, kilopascal, yeah, per kilopascal. Yeah, that's what is given to you, and it is being done at 25 degrees Celsius. Assuming the Langmuir type of isotherm, the pressure at which 50% surface coverage is being done. 50% surface coverage means theta value is 50%. Okay, or you can write down 50 upon 100. That's what your theta value is actually. So you have to use Langmuir adsorption isotherm. The formula for Langmuir adsorption isotherm is theta is equals to, since there is no there is no dissociation or association happening, so it will be just Kp upon 1 plus Kp, or you can write down in this form, that is Kp is equals to theta upon 1 plus theta. You just have to substitute the values and you have to calculate the pressure. Do it like that. So pressure will be equal to Kp is going to be equal to theta is how much. I can just I can just solve it like this. So 0.5 upon 1 plus 0.5. That's what I will get in the denominator. Sorry, it should be minus. Okay, sorry, yeah, the formula over here, here it should be minus. Okay, so fine, it's minus over here. Alright, so I will get Kp is equals to here 0.5 divided by 0.5 divided by 0.5. So this is going to give me 1. So basically I will get Kp is equals to 1, or P is equals to 1 upon K. Just put the value of K. K is equals to what? Ratio of absorption and desorption. So that will be 1 upon 0.2, and the answer will be in kilopascals per kilopascal. So I'll just remove this 10. So just solve it. It will get 5 kilopascal as the answer. So the correct answer for this particular question is going to be your option number 1. Alright, it was pretty simple. Just by using the formula from your Langmuir adsorption isotherm, you could have done this question very easily. Alright, let's move to the next question then. The question over here is from your Maxwell relation in the thermodynamics. It says, for the closed system in the absence of non-PV work, the state function which gives rise to the Maxwell relation, the relation is del T by del P at constant S is equals to del V by del S at constant P. Now to solve this question, it's recommended that you should be well aware about all the Maxwell relations. You should have done at least once the derivation of them. Then only you will be able to solve this question very easily. Okay, so how it will be done, how we will start. We know that dH, that is enthalpy, is given by this TdS plus VdP, right? We know this. Now if I differentiate this dH by ds, taking P as constant, this particular equation I'm differentiating with respect to S, taking P as constant. So this will become 1, ds will become 1, I will just get T over here. Whereas since P is constant, so dP term will get vanished. So I will just get T. Okay, this is going to be my first equation. Similarly, I can just differentiate this dH by dP at constant S. When I do that, this particular term will become 0 and I will just get V from here, right? So this is going to be equation number 2. Now what I'm going to do, both these equations I'm just going to differentiate it once again, because enthalpy is a state function, so I'll use that property of a state function, right? So I'll just differentiate it once again by respect to P, and dH by ds at constant P, and I'll take overall at constant S. Okay, so what I'm going to get is del T. Okay, on the right hand side I will get del T by del P at constant S. So that's what I will get. From the second equation I will get d by ds and del H by del P at constant S, and overall it's going to be at constant P. So on the right hand side I will get dP, or basically del P. Okay, I will get del P by del S at constant P. So I got my relation, right? What I got is these two things which were being given in the question, these two parts, right? So how I got it from the Maxwell relation of H, from the enthalpy equation. So basically this is going to be for enthalpy. I have done it because I know this, right? I have already solved questions, and that's why just by looking into the Maxwell relation I could have easily figured it out that how to do that. But if you want to understand it, that how it is being done, I will suggest you to solve all the Maxwell relations related to Helmholtz free energy, Gibbs free energy, internal energy, and enthalpy. So once you will do all of them, and when it will be asked in exam, you will automatically get to know that yes, how you have to do it or which equation you have to use. Alright, so that's how it will be done, and enthalpy is going to be the correct answer for this particular question. Alright, let's go for the next question then. The next one is from your kinetics, and it is actually from your from the radioactive reactions, right? So it says that fraction of carbon 14 remaining in an 11,460 years old sample, half life is given 5,730 years is. Okay, so they are asking how many fraction of carbon 14 molecule or atom is going to be remaining. So it's given that time is given 11,460 years, right? And T half is given to us as 5,730 years. So let me just use this T half to calculate my rate constant, since we know that radioactive reactions are of first order reaction. So 0.693 upon T half, that's the formula. So I'll use 0.693 divided by 5730 years. Okay, so this is going to be in the terms of years inverse, right? The unit will be in years inverse. Now let me use the equation to calculate the fraction of the molecule. So it will be K is equals to 2.303 upon T, okay, upon T, and you have log A initial by A final. Okay, so this is the concentration or the number of molecules initially, and this is the number of molecules in the final step or in the after that particular time. So let me put the values now. So it is 0.693 by 5730, and it is 2.303 divided by T is 11,460, and this will be log AI by AF. Solve this up, and like you have to take this to the other side and solve this. So on solving you will get 0.6018, okay, 0.6018, and this will be log AI by AF. So basically your AI by AF is going to be anti-log of this, okay, anti-log of 0.6018. Now we know that and log value of 4 is 0.6010, right? So it will be quite near to that, so we can just take a rough value. So since log 4, I'm just giving it over here, log 4 has a value of 0.6010, so we can just relate it from there, and the value of this is going to be 4, okay. So AI by AF is going to be 4. So what will be the value of, now we have to find out the fraction of molecule remaining after that interval of time. So actually what we need to find out is AF upon AI, means final number of atoms divided by initial number of atoms. That will be 1 by 4, and that will be 0.25. So that is going to be the answer. Option number 3 is going to be the correct answer, like that, okay. So it was a lot of mathematics involved in this particular question, and also a few amount of your knowledge of your rate constant and the first order rate reactions, okay. So I guess you guys understood this and how to do that, right? Let's go to the next question then. Alright, so talking about this particular question, it says the process in which temperature of ideal gas does not change, okay. So it has been asked that where the temperature does not changes. Now anything which is sudden compression or sudden expansion, these all are irreversible process, okay. So these are all are irreversible process, and remember irreversible process are spontaneous process, and in all the spontaneous processes your temperature changes, or you can say that your irreversible processes are going to be either exothermic or endothermic. So that means the temperature is going to change over there, okay. So here sudden compression is not going to be the correct answer. Talking about the second thing, that is adiabatic expansion, and both are adiabatic expansion. Basically one is reversible, the other one is against 1 bar pressure. So you should know that in the adiabatic expansion, you know the Carnot cycle, you have studied the Carnot cycle, right? This was isothermal expansion, okay, and this was adiabatic. So in the adiabatic you might have seen that the temperature, if it was T2 over here, from B to C, this point it became T1, so the temperature changes. In the adiabatic process, whether it is expansion or compression, your temperature is going to change. So temperature does not, like temperature is going to change in adiabatic processes, whether it is reversible or whether it is it is against 1 bar pressure, right? So the only thing which is left out for the process there where the temperature does not changes, that is the free expansion. Free expansion means the change, like basically what is happening over here is free expansion means your P external is 0, so your work done over here is going to be like, if you use this, so P external and dV, PdV, that's what we use, right? So external pressure is going to be 0 under the free expansion, so this work done is actually going to be 0. Now you can put the formula of work done, that is 2.303 RT, and you have ln, this is for the isothermal process, right? For adiabatic also, if you like, for any process, if the work done is equals to 0, you can use any of the equation of work, either for adiabatic process or for the isothermal process, and your temperature is going to change over temperature is going to get constant in that particular case. Isothermal, though, it will be constant, but for adiabatic also Cv T2 minus T1 if you use, so T1 is equals to T2, that also it becomes. So free expansion, the case of free expansion only, your work done will be 0, and in that particular case your temperature is not going to change, right? So that's how your option number 1 is going to be correct for this particular question. Okay, let's go to the next one, which is from your Arrhenius equation. It says the activation energy of biomolecular reaction is 104 kilojoules per mole at 300 Kelvin. Its enthalpy of activation in kilojoules per mole would be closest to. Okay, let's try to solve this. Now activation energy is given to us, that is 104 kilojoules per mole, okay, and it's also given that the temperature is 300 Kelvin, okay, that's what it is given to us. what they are asking, and R is also given to us, it's 8.314. What they are asking is the enthalpy of activation, that means H bar, okay, or H hash is being asked. So how to do this, how these things are related? So using the Ehring's equation, which relates your Arrhenius equation with your with the thermodynamic quantities. So from there we know that delta H hash, that is delta H of enthalpy of your activated complex, is actually equal to EA minus RT. This is for unimolecular reaction, remember, okay. This is for unimolecular reaction. What will be about for your bimolecular reaction? So that will be EA minus 2RT. So that is for bimolecular reaction. So bimolecular reaction, let's put the values now. So delta H is what we have to calculate. EA is given to us as 104 kilojoules. I'll put it in joules, 104,000 joules, and it will be 2. And RT is going to be how much? RT, the value of R is given to us as 8.314. Temperature is given to us as 300. You have to do a little bit of mathematics, solve this, and you are going to get 104,000 minus. This is going to be yeah, so if you solve this up, you are going to get fine. So overall the value I'll just write down after solving this. So you are going to get 99011.6, okay, 99011.6 joules per mole. Since the answer is asked in kilojoules per mole, right? So we'll just convert this. So this will be 99.011 kilojoules per mole. So the answer will be option number 2, like that. Alright, so this is how it will be done, and it was easy only, you just need to know the formula, that's it. Alright, so let's talk about this particular question. It is from your Slater's determinant, which says that the wave function that correctly describes the ground state of hydrogen molecules in terms of two atomic orbitals SA and SB in the spin functions alpha and beta. Okay, so you will be having a radial spin part and a spatial part, right? Two parts will be there. So let's talk about the spatial part first of all. So since it is given that SA and SB belong to the two atomic orbitals, right? So these will be the two atomic orbitals. So basically what is going to happen, they are talking about the ground state somewhere, right? Yeah, so here they are talking about the ground state of the molecule. Ground state means when these two atomic orbitals will come together, they are going to form molecular orbitals, right? So there will be a molecular orbital, there will be a bonding molecular orbital formed, and there will be a anti-bonding molecular orbital which will be formed, okay? So anti-bonding molecular orbital will be formed. Now we know that if it is SA and this is denoted by SB, so the bonding molecular orbital will have a positive sign, whereas the anti-bonding molecular orbital will have a negative sign. We know that, right? They will be added constructively here, whereas they will be added destructively over here. So that means since they are talking about the ground state, that means what? For the ground state we have to talk about the bonding molecular orbital, and that means the sign between the atomic orbital has to be positive sign. I am not going into the complete derivation of it, because that will take much time, and by this method only you can fetch out the correct answer, okay? So that means it should have a positive sign. So you can easily neglect option 3 and 4, okay? So either first is correct or second is correct. Now you have to look upon the spin states, okay? So spin states there are two spin states. It can be like first one is in alpha spin and the second one is in beta spin, okay? Beta 2, whereas it can be like alpha 2 and beta 1, okay? So alpha 2 and beta 1, sorry. So it will be alpha 2 and alpha 2 and beta 1, right? So that these are the only two spin, because the electrons will be paired up over here, right? So one will be in positive spin, second one will be in negative spin. Remember, alpha means positive spin, beta means negative spin, minus half spin. So first one in positive spin, second one in negative spin, or it can be like second in positive spin and first in negative spin. So it's like that, okay? So you can write them like this. Now since we have known that the overall molecular orbital which will be formed, or overall wave function, should be asymmetrical, okay? It should be asymmetrical. So that's what it is needed to form a wave function from on the basis of your Slater's determinant. So that tells you that the overall wave function has to be asymmetrical. Now we have known that for the ground state the spatial part will have a positive sign. So with the positive sign it will become symmetrical part. So the other part has to be asymmetrical. So for asymmetrical part, obviously that has to be a negative sign over there, right? So the spin part has to be a negative sign, so that one of the part will become asymmetrical and the other part becomes symmetrical, so that overall wave function becomes asymmetrical. So in that case, you can just simply say that option number 2 is the correct option. You don't have to even solve this question, okay? Either you can do it like this, or you can just form the, or like you can just form um, the determinant, and you can solve it by 1 upon n factorial, under root n factorial, and so on. Okay, so I have already made a video on this, so I guess you have already watched it. In case if you have missed it, so I'll push that video over here in the I button. You can click that over there and you can watch the complete solution of all the questions which can be asked based upon your Slater's determinant, and how basically a Slater's determinant is solved. So I've discussed it over here. Based upon that, you can solve it over here, right? But this is the easiest way how you can approach this particular question. It was a 2-marker question. It didn't need that much time to be invested. It's just you have to solve it based upon the knowledge which you have, right? All right, let's go to the next question then. The next question says that H2O2 belongs to the point group. So which point group is there in your H2O2 molecule, that is your hydrogen peroxide molecule? Okay, so when it is not mentioned, see, H2O2 belongs to 3 types of structures. One is open book structure, the other one is your cis H2O2, and the other one is your trans H2O2. Now, if it is not mentioned that which H2O2 we are talking about, you have to consider the general form, that is the open book form of it. Okay, so open book arrangement of this H2O2 molecule. Now, this looks something like this. Okay, so it goes something like this. If you want to make the planes also, you can show it in this way, that this is one of the plane and the other plane goes like this. Okay, so it's kind of a open book structure, and the only arrangement, or if you want to show it in the on the basis of stereochemistry, so it will go something like this. This hydrogen will be here, this will be also below the plane, but the dihedral angle will be different. Okay, so the only axis which will pass through it is the C2 axis. So the point group for which it will belong will be C2. So C2 is going to be the point group for this H2O2 molecule in the open book structure. If it would be cis H2O2, in that particular case C2V would be the point group in that case, and if it would be a trans, then it would be C2H would be the answer. But since cis and trans is not mentioned, in that particular case you just have to take general H2O2 molecule structure, that is open book structure, and in that case it has a C2 axis of symmetry, that's all. So the point group and the element of symmetry over here will be only identity and C2 axis, that's it. So in that particular case the point group comes out to be C2 point group. Alright, let's go to the next question then. Okay, the next one says the molecule is in excited state, excited at x1 nanometer, lambda max of the fluorescence and phosphorescence band are observed at lambda 2 and x2 and x3 nanometers respectively. In most of the cases, the correct statement among the following is. So how you have to determine it? Based upon the Jablonski diagram. So how we do that? In the Jablonski diagram, let's say this is our ground state. We excite our electron to a particular higher energy state. Now these are all singlet state. This electron will come to the S0 state, that is the S1 state, that is the lowest singlet excited state, and then it jumps from there to the ground state, and this particular process is called as fluorescence, right? Now it can also undergo inter-system crossing, okay, and it can go to a particular energy states which are triplet in level. So it can go to the lowest triplet energy excited state, and then it can come back to the ground state, and this process is called as phosphorescence. This is excitation. Okay, excitation. Now if I talk about the energies, if I talk about from the point of view of energy, if let's say the energy of excitation is E1, the energy of fluorescence is E2, the energy of phosphorescence is E3, then the order of energy will go like this, that is your E1 will be highest, then comes your E2, and E3 will be lowest, right? These are the order of energies. Now since we know that the wavelength and energy both are inversely proportional to each other, we are talking about wavelength over here, so just reverse the order. So lambda 1 or the x1, okay, so because the wavelength is expressed in the form of x over here, so x1 will be smallest, then comes your x2, and x3 will be highest. So for phosphorescence we need the highest, like we will get the highest wavelength. For fluorescence we will get the medium wavelength, and for excitation the wavelength will be lowest. The correct answer comes out to be option number 3. It was very simple, just based upon the Jablonski diagram and the concept of it. Alright, so I hope this is much clear to you guys. Let's go to the next question now. Okay, so talking about this particular question, it was a very good question. It says in the unit of rate constant are m to the power minus 1 by 2 s to the power minus 1. The order of reaction would be, now many people might got confused with this thing, right? But the correct way of doing it is that over here this m is actually molality. Okay, it's molality, and the unit of molality is moles per liter. That's the unit, so you have to substitute it over here. So it is not nothing but moles per liter whole to the power minus 1 by 2, and you also have second inverse. Okay, so overall you will get moles to the power 1 by 2, liters to the power 1 by 2, because we have to multiply both of them. The minus minus will get cancelled out. Second inverse. Now you should know that the general equation for the rate constant, unit of the rate constant, is given by that unit is actually mole to the power 1 minus n, liter to the power n minus 1, and second inverse. So that is the general like unit of n order reaction. Okay, the order of the unit of the rate constant for the nth order reaction. Now you can just relate both of them to get the correct answer. So if you relate both of them, so 1 minus n will be equal to minus 1 by 2, or you can say that n is equals to 1 plus 1 by 2. So n will be equal to 3 by 2, or you can say n is equals to 1.5. So the order of the reaction is 1.5. That's your option number 2, and that is going to be the correct answer for this particular question. Alright, so it was very simple. You just need to know that what does that m, capital M, is, and just the unit of that, and then everything is very simple for you. Alright, let's go to the next question now. Alright, so let's talk about this last question over here in this video. So it says that as shown in the figure below, for a particle incident on the barrier from the left, the wave function in the region 1 and region 3 is given by. Okay, so in the region 1 it is given, and in the region 3 it is given. Alright, and they are asking the correct statement among the following is. So now let's try to understand this. First of all, this is a problem from a concept called as quantum tunneling, and you don't have to worry about a lot of quantum mechanics over here. If you just know the basics, if you just know how the concept works, you can answer this question. At least one part you can easily answer. So let me just draw quickly this particular diagram and quickly show you that how it is going to happen. Okay, so let me just draw this. Alright, so this is the region number 1, this is region number 2, and this is your region number 3. Now this is a potential barrier of length a unit, right? So that's the potential barrier, and this is the direction in which your particle is actually propagating. So let me just draw the mean the mean direction of the particle. So this is the mean direction. So if the amplitude of the particle, if the particle wave is something like this, okay, let's say it is propagating like this. So within this particular potential barrier, it is going to tunnel through it through exponential decay, which you know from the tunneling effect equation, right? So it is going to tunnel through it. Exponential decay happens over here, and the wave function, or the wave which you will experience in the region number 3, will have a particular amplitude which will be much smaller than that of your first region, right? So this is what happens in your quantum tunneling. Your particle propagating in the first region, after getting refracted through a potential barrier, it gets exponential decay, and then the amplitude decreases. So first thing you can clearly say that if the amplitude over this region is a1, and the amplitude over this region is a3, right? Sorry, a2 is the amplitude over this region. This is the amplitude over this region. So right now you can see that this particular wave function has two parts. It has a positive part and a negative exponential part. Why this is given? Because this particular wave function will get reflected, and it will travel in both the direction. It will travel in forward direction as well as it will travel in the backward direction after getting reflected from here. So if you understand the quantum tunneling effect, what happens, that a wave function or a particle in the form of wave, when it strikes a potential barrier, it's get refracted and it also get reflected. Okay, so the part which get reflected is given by this particular term. That is, this particular term is representing the negative side, or it's representing that wave function which is getting reflected back, which is traveling in the right direction, or and this particular part is the wave function which is traveling in the forward direction. Okay, So that's how the overall wave function will be derived for this. And after refraction from here, after doing that tunneling, the amplitude will decrease. So the amplitude of the forward direction of wave function in this first case and in the third case will be in such a way that your A2 is obviously is going to be very small than A1. Now will it be equal to this? So yes, it can be equal to this if the potential well, if the size of the potential well is too small compared to the amplitude. So it depends upon if the amplitude is too high and the potential the length of the potential barrier is very small. In that case, they can be even equal to each other. So that means A2 amplitude value of A2 is going to be smaller than A1. So either option number A is going to be correct or option number 3 is going to be correct. Okay, any of these can be correct. So first part we have done just based upon the normal concept understanding. The next part which we have to do is we have to solve or we have to find out for the relation between k1 and for the k2. Okay, so the relation between these two terms. So let's try to do that. For that we'll take the wave function equation, which is the standard wave function equation. So for the first region, psi1 is given by it's the function of x and t. So it is given by e to the power minus I e t by h cross. All right, and in the bracket it will be like a1, okay, e to the power ipx by h cross. I am representing the wave function in the terms of potential functions. Okay, I am representing in the form of potential. So this is left propagating wave. Okay, and plus b1, okay, plus b1 e to the power minus ipx by h cross. Now this particular part is your right propagating wave. Okay, so this is your left propagating, okay, and this one is your right propagating, as I told you before, right? So this is right propagating wave function, wave basically. And in the third part, in the third region, you can also write down in this way, that is you can write it down like this, that is e to the power minus I h cross I e naught or I e t by h cross, and it will be given by a2 e to the power ipx by h cross, and plus the other term you can write down, let's say b2 and e to the power e to the power I minus ip x upon h cross. Okay, now this particular part will be 0 because in the third region there will be no backward propagating wave, because the only propagation is only from the left side. There is no reflection which is happening in this, right? So there will be only left propagating part. So only this part will be there and this particular part will become equal to 0. So that's what it is shown. In the third part you can see there is just one term given to you, right? So now you just have to relate the values, since in the question it is given in the terms of this, so you can just relate the values or the powers with this particular value. So if you just relate both of them, what you are going to get is k1 will be equal to your p upon h cross, and similarly your k2, okay, if you just relate it from here, so your k2 will also be equal to your p upon h cross. Okay, so both of these terms becomes equal to each other. You can see them, right? So both of these power values, like e to the power I k1x and e to the power minus like e to the power I k2x, so k1 is equals to k2 for this particular region. So the correct answer comes out to be option number 1. All right, so in this particular way you can use the concept of your tunneling, quantum tunneling, to solve this equation to find out the equation for the wave function, and that's how this has to be done. All right, so if you'll keep on studying this particular topic of quantum tunneling, you'll get to know much more things about it. Although questions were not being asked from this topic since last few years, but in this region exam it was asked, and it was really a very good question. So that's all from my side, guys. I hope this was much clear to you and you guys understood it well, that how this will be solved and what will be the correct answer of this particular question. So that's all from my side. I have tried to solve all the physical chemistry question from part B, that is section B of 2 markers in your CSI NET exam which were asked. Next I'll try to solve questions from part C on the All India level exam which was held on 15th of December, right? So thank you so much for watching, and if you're new to this channel, do subscribe to the channel. If you like this video, give it a like, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Till then, have a great day.